Hello, friends. It is Sunday, July 21st, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. Well, the big news of this week, in fact, the big news of today, as you can see on your screen, is that President Joe Biden has dropped out of his bid for re-election. You'll see a formal letter from Joseph R. Biden Jr., dated today, July 21st, in which, if you move down to that highlighted paragraph, he says, well, it has been my intention to seek re-election. I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president. Well, lots of news this week. Not only was there an assassination attempt on former President Trump, but now Biden is out of the race. If you've been watching me for a while, you know I said this a few times at least, I hope you remember, that anything can happen this year, and that I wasn't going to assume that Biden and Trump would be the official candidates because you never know. One could drop out, there could be health problems, or one could even die. And it seems like we came close to one, and we have realized another. So I will get to the story in a minute. What do I want to say about this is I want to tie it into my usual topic, which is the alternative candidates for the presidency, which would be independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Libertarian and Green Party candidates in particular. But since there's been so much going on with the major parties, I am going to talk about that today, as well as tying it in to RFK's bid for election. So now that Biden has dropped out, they're going to be seeking a replacement, obviously. Are they going to turn possibly to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who had been seeking the Democratic nomination way back last year before he dropped out and decided he was going to run as an independent? Well, I don't think so, and I will tell you why. For one thing, the reason that Kennedy dropped out is that the Democratic establishment had already decided that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee and that they were going to use their influence to crowd out anybody else. If you recall on my previous episodes, I spelled this out as it was happening, which were things like they were not going to hold debates with the other candidates for the Democratic nomination. They were going to, in some states, they were either not going to have a primary election at all, just assuming Joe Biden would be the nominee, or they were not going to put the other candidates on the ballot. So there are a lot of ways that they're trying to keep it structured so that there would be no challenges to Biden. And as we saw in the past, Democratic establishment, composed of their major donors and the top officials within the party, have been moving away from Biden. You live by the Democratic establishment, you die by the Democratic establishment. As Biden was losing support from these donors, and as he was losing support from the higher ups in the U.S. Congress, like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the leader of the House over there, Hakeem Jeffries, they're giving him private messages and hinting in public that Biden wasn't going to make it. So he was forced to drop out. Now this, I've also said this, reminds me a lot of 1968, where not only did we have Robert F. Kennedy Sr. running, and there was an assassination, actually two high-profile assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy Sr., but then early in that year, the incumbent president, Lyndon Johnson, who was running for re-election, dropped out early because he had lost support of the Democratic establishment, and the race went to Nixon and Humphrey. Bad sign that the Republican Nixon did win in that year, 1968. But moving it closer to today, another story came out this week that shows you how the Democratic establishment really has been calling the shots here. Now, we know from the revelations in 2016 that the Democratic National Committee had been colluding with the Hillary Clinton campaign in a number of ways to forestall Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. For one thing, they had a secret arrangement where you have this process where a presidential candidate can go around to the states and hold fundraisers for the state party, and then that money is supposed to go kickback from the DNC to the state party. So you go in and you raise money. It's donated to the Democratic National Committee, and then some of it's kicked back to the state party. Well, in 2016, they kicked back a heck of a lot of money to presidential candidate Hillary Clinton by the DNC spending that on her rather than on any state party funding. So there were questions about in the debate fed to Hillary ahead of time, and they arranged the schedule for the debates to give her the best advantage. So we saw in 2016, and I think you all are aware of this, that they tried to rig the process, the Democratic primary process, to get Hillary Clinton as the candidate rather than Bernie Sanders. And why? Because Bernie Sanders would not play ball with the major Democratic donors, because Bernie Sanders was not somebody who would always go along to get along with the Democratic establishment, so he is not regarded as terribly reliable. And further proof of that came out this week in an article from Jacobin. Let me put this up on the screen for you in just a second. And they are saying that some of the top Democrats have openly admitted recently that they pushed Biden to block Bernie. And this came in the context of them talking this week about getting Biden out of the picture. Let's look at the couple of these. They quoted a couple of people, and so I'm going to play for you the video of those interviews that they were relying on for this. Former Representative Harold Ford, who was also at one time chair of the Democratic National Committee and a banking executive, so he is definitely part of that Democratic elite, despite what he says. And then Representative Adam Smith was the other one. So let's hear what they had to say on CNN and Fox earlier this week.
I resent President Biden going on my friend Joe Scarborough's show this morning and calling, I assume, people like me elites. I would remind the president that in 2020, if you want to view me as an elite, I was an elite that supported you in 2020. That said that we should do everything we possibly could to advantage you against Bernie Sanders, because I thought Bernie Sanders' politics were detrimental to the party and to the country.
And I've said this over and over again. Joe Biden was not picked in 2020 because he was the only person who could beat Trump. He was picked because he was the only person that could beat Bernie Sanders, rightly or wrongly. And by the way, for the Sanders fans out there, I'm not judging, but that conclusion was made, okay? Oh my gosh, coming out of Nevada, Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee. And people, just like they are now, back then said, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. So they were looking for an alternative.
Well, just like Bernie Sanders, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not going to play ball with the big donors. His whole platform, his main part of his platform, is to get corporate influence out of the government. And for a long time, the Democratic Party has been painting him as anti-science and anti-vax and a conspiracy theorist. So it'd be hard for them to get away from that public messaging and suddenly turn in their tracks and accept Kennedy, who has been a long-time registered Democrat, or he was anyway until recently. So they're not going to look to Kennedy. They want to pick who they're going to get. It'd probably be someone like Kamala Harris, although Biden didn't give her any endorsement in his letter, and there are people within the party who are conflicted about who to put in Biden's stead. So I don't think they're going to turn to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and that leaves the question of then what's going to happen in the rest of the race. Now, the other big news this week, of course, was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, which happened last Saturday, I believe. Let me double check here. Yeah, last Saturday. And the interesting thing about this, of course, there's a lot of interesting things about it, and you can hear about that on other news media, but he made a phone call the very next day to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I'm only going to play a very short part of that phone call.
Really, you man, something's wrong with that whole system. And, and it's the doctors you find. Remember I said I want to do small doses. Small doses. When you feed a baby, Bobby, a vaccination that has like 38 different vaccines, and it looks like it's meant for a horse, not a 10-pound or 20-pound baby. It looks like you should be giving a horse this. And do you ever see the size of it, right? It's just massive. And then you see the baby all of a sudden starting to change radically. I've seen it too many times. And then you hear that it doesn't have an impact, right? But you and I talked about that a long time ago. And anyway, I would love you to do stuff, and I think it'll be so good for you and so big for you. And we're gonna win. We're gonna win. You know, we're way ahead of the guy. And you know, he's interesting. It was very nice, actually. He called me.
Well, the big news in that was that Trump was revealing his views, or at least he was stating to Kennedy that his view, longtime view, had been against vaccines for children. And of course, that's something that Robert Kennedy has been associated with. So Trump was clearly playing up to Kennedy to get something out of it. And as you saw there near the end of that part of the conversation, Trump did say, "I would love for you to do something." What that something was is still not known exactly. After that part of it, Trump went on to talk about his ear encounter with death, how the bullet was past his ear, and then he talked about telling this story to Biden, how Biden had called him and was nice to him. But in that short segment, what we learned was, number one, that Trump is saying he's anti-vaccine. He wanted to show Kennedy he was on his side. Number two, he was asking Kennedy to do something for him. And number three, he just went into his story about Joe Biden. So I noticed in this, some people were accusing Kennedy of colluding with Trump or being kind of in cahoots with him. But clearly, Kennedy's body language and his very terse answers to Trump, like, "Yup," showed a man who was kind of eager to get off the phone, like you have some long-winded relative or friend who just goes on, and you're kind of patiently waiting. You got other things to do, and you're just trying to, not give them too much encouragement by making short answers like, okay, yeah. That's my take on it, that Kennedy was not really, he was listening, but he was not buying into what Trump was trying to induce him to do. So the very next day after that, after this phone call, they did have a meeting in Milwaukee. Let me show you the story here. And at that meeting, after the meeting, what the Kennedy spokesperson had to say was that they had discussed, quote, national unity, end quote, in the days after the assassination attempt. Now, what does that mean? It also says there at the bottom, and I think this is from CNN. Yeah, it is CNN. This story is from CNN. Said that they discussed Trump's vice presidential nomination decision. Now, what would he be soliciting Kennedy's opinion on the various people that Trump had been interviewing? Or had he actually been talking to RFK about the possibility of RFK being his vice presidential candidate? That's not clear at all from what they had to say. It's a possibility in my mind that that's what Trump was trying to get him to do, because he didn't announce his running mate as J.D. Vance until a few hours later. So this may have been an attempt to get Kennedy to be his vice presidential nominee. But on the other hand, there's another story here from Politico, I believe, that said that people familiar with the huddle, outside people who were familiar with the talks between Trump and Kennedy, said they were talking about endorsing Trump, and Kennedy declined to do so. Now, which was it? Was he, I guess it doesn't really matter which it was, vice presidential, or maybe he said you could have a position within the administration, or maybe he only wanted an endorsement. Hard to tell, but it was clear what he was trying to do is suck up to RFK and then get him on his side so RFK would give some kind of, tilt the scales towards Trump and away from Biden, or even drop out of the race entirely to endorse Trump. Not clear exactly what happened there, but this is the difference between the Democratic Party and Trump's way of operating. One of the big differences is that Trump sees everything as transactional. He tries to, bargain with people. He tries to negotiate with people. If he sees Kennedy as a threat to his reelection, he will start, trying to find out where he can find common ground with Kennedy and how he can induce him to go along with it. Whereas the Democrats' whole way of dealing with outsiders and anybody who might be a threat to their plans for who should be the candidate and who should be the president is to try to squelch people. Try to squelch people in the primaries, try to threaten people with, you won't be able to go anywhere in Democratic politics if you don't go along with us, and that type of thing. So here it doesn't look, once again, like the Democratic Party is being very democratic, or their whole way of operating is not nearly as open and deliberative as Trump's is. Trump trying to get somebody on his side and trying to negotiate, whereas the Democrats are just shutting him out entirely. So I wouldn't hold my breath on the Democrats trying to get Kennedy on their ticket. What's up next is, let's see, one other thing that came out of this is early Monday before that meeting, Trump actually did do a favor to Kennedy, which was that he made a statement that he believes Kennedy deserves Secret Service protection. So he's doing him a favor. And immediately after that, like the next day, I think the Secretary of Homeland Security said that they were giving Secret Service protection to Kennedy. Now, Kennedy had been seeking this for months and months and not getting anywhere. In fact, the previous week, they reiterated their stance that a candidate who was not a major party candidate had to get at least 20% in certain select polls before they would give him any kind of Secret Service protection. And they changed their tune after the assassination attempt, and Biden did that for them. Biden directed the director of Social Security to do that. So the Kennedy-Trump thing did produce a win for Kennedy, and he got what he was seeking for a long time. Now he will no longer have the big expense of his own private security team. I'm not sure how much of that should be a comfort to him, since the Secret Service proved to be so inept in preventing an assassination attempt on Trump. But he's, as you'll see later, Kennedy does have some financial woes, apparently, and so this is a way for him to reduce his expenses and make his money go farther. What I have coming up else is, let's see, I want to update you on the ballot access issues for Kennedy, and then I want to jump to Kennedy's agreements with the Libertarian Party to help one another and the continuing conflicts within the Libertarian Party over that. So quickly, a review of where Kennedy is at on ballot access. In Nebraska, the Democratic Party is trying to kick RFK off the ballot on the grounds that he's not truly a, quote, nonpartisan candidate, end quote, because Kennedy has been the nominee of various minor parties in different parts of the country. So, that's what they do, to try to find whatever grounds they can to kick threats off the ballot. Once again, not very democratic acting. And in that's the one piece of threat to Kennedy, again, trying to get him off the ballot where he's already done what he has to get on the ballot. And in North Carolina, though, the State Board of Elections, which is dominated by Democrats, 3-2, I believe, they finally approved Kennedy for the state ballot. Kennedy had already gotten enough valid signatures in each county, but there was a hang-up in the State Board of Elections. Earlier, they had approved the Constitutional Party, which is more likely to take votes from Republicans, as an aside, and they still rejected Cornel West, who, as a progressive, is probably going to pull more votes from Biden. But they did say they didn't have legal grounds to keep Kennedy off the ballot, but they're still investigating the West petitions, thinking that there had been some kind of misrepresentatives made to people who were signing their petitions. In Oklahoma, where they don't have a signature requirement to get on the ballot, rather they have a $35,000 filing fee. Only two presidential candidates made it onto the Oklahoma ballot, one being Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the other being Chris Garrity, and I have no idea who he is, and I don't think he's on very many ballots. And where did he come up with the $35,000? This must be somebody that has money to spend on his own vanity projects. I don't know. But on a final piece here is that Kennedy's campaign, volunteer campaign, mostly I think in Oregon, having seen some of the dispatches because I live here in Oregon at this time anyway. I'm about to move to California. They did get enough signatures to put the We the People Party on the ballot in Oregon, and they're going to be bringing in more signatures next week. I think the deadline is Monday, but anyway, it's this coming week to get those signatures in. So they got enough signatures already, but they got more coming in for the paid petitioners. Now, there were a couple more stories about Kennedy in the news, and Politico in particular, that I wanted to bring your attention to because it's a segue into what's going on in the Libertarian Party. So first off here, We have a story that Kennedy has been canceling campaign events in the last couple of weeks, and we really don't have any clue why. I'm not sure if that's true. I haven't been following myself if he's been having scheduled events or not, but that's what Politico reported. And then they had another story that seemed to be related to that, and that is that Kennedy's having fundraising problems, that his campaign is taking in less money than it needs to break even. They said in this recent pay period, he raised about 5.4 million, but spent about 6.2 million, and they have about 5.5 million cash on hand, but $3 million in debt. Now, even though Nicole Shanahan, his vice presidential pick, has been pouring a lot of money into the race, Kennedy's been trying to raise money from small donors and from other donors as well, bigger and smaller donors, and not being as successful as they would like to be, apparently. So, coming out of that, if that's true, I'm not sure of either of those, but the fundraising one I know has been a chronic problem. It takes a lot of money to run for the presidency. Kennedy announced earlier this week, just on Friday, just a couple of days ago, at the end of the week on Friday, that they had this historic agreement with the Libertarian Party to do a joint fundraising project. Now, I reported on this earlier, but let me repeat how this would help him. If you raise money as a political party, you can accept larger donations than if you're raising money as an independent candidate. So once again, it's giving an advantage to political parties, mostly to help the Democratic and Republican parties, because the other parties, the smaller parties, what good does it do them if they don't have a lot of big donors? And the Kennedy campaign is saying, well, if the Libertarian Party holds a fundraiser, then his donors could give large amounts to that party, and then the party could spend the money by donating it to the Kennedy campaign, and they would keep 10% for themselves. So this would be a benefit both to Kennedy because he could accept larger donations, and to the Libertarian Party because it is having its own fundraising issues. This article is from Third Party Watch by George Feelies, and it documents, you see the headline here, LNC in dire fiscal straits. That's the Libertarian National Committee. And after the headline, I cut down to a lower part of the text that you see on your screen. And look at the highlighted part. It says, given current loss rates, the LNC is a month or two from running out of reserve cash and having to cut expenses. They have a quote from one of the members of the LNC, Adam Hammond, who says, the LP is broke. It may even be underwater. So that would explain why the Libertarian Party and Kennedy are getting together to try to raise money jointly, because both are having problems raising the money that they need, and they found a way that they can use Kennedy's big donors to help both of them at the same time. But Libertarian Party has also had a lot of controversy within over its partnership with Kennedy. One of the members of their Democratic National Committee who has been unhappy with their efforts to work with Kennedy, Karen Harlos, generated a motion that other people signed to not go forward with the Kennedy fundraising agreement. And then the LNC, which is dominated by the Mises Caucus, and it's the Mises Caucus that did not want their official nominee to win that nomination. The Mises Caucus has been leading the effort. Some members of the Mises Caucus, like Angela McArdle, the chair of the National Committee, has been in the negotiations with Kennedy. And here we see that the vote was 6-11 to vote down this motion to stop the Kennedy Libertarian Party agreement. They want to go forward with it, and that's why Kennedy felt free to announce it, because they signed on to it. And part of the background of this is this continuing fight that I've reported on before between the proponents of getting behind their official nominee or doing something else, and either working with Kennedy or trying to get a different nominee or just allowing states to go their own way. The chair, Angela McArdle, was complaining about things going on their public discussion list. And here's a quote from one of the things she had to say. Here's what I observed: tons of energy expended on tying up the LNC, undermining my authority, acting in defiance of my explicit instructions, insulting me, dragging staff into the list business, complaints, incomplete appeals, meddling in subcommittees, and general disruption and chaos. Zero energy being spent on supporting our candidates or fundraising. Every ounce of energy is sucked up into this drama, and it needs to stop. Now she's talking specifically about Karen Carlos and their fights over the Kennedy fundraising thing and over their apparent unwillingness to fully back Chase Oliver. Here's another one, back and forth over this. Angela McCardle email. This is responding to Karen Carlos. She says, "You are actively obstructing every avenue of productivity, clogging up the business list, blah, blah, blah." But the second highlighted part is key to my argument about how much RFK is roiling the party. You are hyper fixated on RFK Jr. That's what she's complaining about, that the faction trying to the faction trying to support their official nominee is also trying to kill their efforts to work with Kennedy. And one more story here, which was that the National Committee, there is also a motion that they should send out the presidential nominating certificates to states, which is what they would need to do for the state parties then to file Chase Oliver as their nominee and get him on their ballot lines in each of those states. And the National Committee voted down that motion to send out the nominating certificates. So they're holding up the process of having the states certify the nominee. For what reason? Who knows? It looks like they have some other plans in mind, or maybe maybe there's some more innocent reason. I really don't know, not being that privy to Libertarian Party internal politics, but I do see a lot. Not only that story, that last story was from the Independent Political Report, where they do report on the various alternative candidates and minor party candidates. Very good source. And then the Third Party Watch is the one that's almost exclusively focused on the inner workings of the Libertarian Party, and that's where I got a lot of my information from. Other than that, I don't have any specific sources. People do send me things, and I do look at them. So it kind of corresponds with what I've been telling you. I guess that's it. We have the Democratic National Convention coming up in August. Let's see, what is the date? Monday, August 19th through Thursday, August 22nd, so not that far. What's going to happen from here on in, who knows? We'll be watching that carefully. We don't even know who the Democratic Party candidate's going to be now. Is it going to be Harris? Is it going to be someone else, a governor maybe, or some dark horse candidate? Anything could happen, because all those delegates pledged to Biden are now free to vote for anybody. What a candidate would have to do is get a lot of those delegates to sign petitions to make them to give them a nomination at the convention. So you're going to see a lot of politicking behind the scenes of people who have aspirations to be president, trying to contact delegates in the Democratic Party and get them on board with signing a petition. Now, those delegates cannot sign more than one petition. They can only do it for one candidate. So we'll see who's coming in ahead with this race to get on the nomination for the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Convention is August 19th, 21st, and the Green Party Convention is coming up just before that, from Thursday, August 15th to Sunday, August 18th, in which it's almost certain they'll nominate Jill Stein, their former two-time presidential nominee. Not last time, but in 2012 and 2016. And that's about it for this week. God knows what's going to happen next week. Quite an interesting year. So I hope you stay with me in the shows. I usually do this update about once a week. I am going to be moving to California very soon, so there may be some interruption in my ability to do these videos. I will give updates from my iPad as anything really interesting happens. So I hope to be here next week. I expect to be here next week as usual. Subscribe, like, share, comment, all that stuff. If you'd like to help support the show, you can go to my website, politicaldharma.com, and make a one-time donation. Or even better, you can go to Patreon to make a recurring donation. I have 2 tiers of membership. One is $2 a month, one is $5 a month, and that's because I don't want to make this something that you have to pay a lot of money for. It's just for people that want to help support it. And so far, I don't have any exclusive benefits for you. So sorry, but if you can help me, please do. That's it for this week. Talk too much, probably over long, but interesting things afoot. Thanks. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.